In our last video, we talked about the time a professional player intentionally died 16 times in Faker's game while he was streaming. This resulted in the trolling player receiving a ton of negative attention that led to his team punishing him by deducting 1 month of his salary, and the league themselves fined him $8,000. An incredibly costly session of League of Legends trolling, and he probably would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for the fact that Faker was streaming. And now coming back to the present day, it seems this has happened again. Just a couple weeks ago, on January 6, 2026, Faker was yet again live streaming his games when he ran into a Rock-On player with a unique playstyle. The playstyle being giving up and just walking around doing nothing until the game ends. It's just 3 minutes into the game and you can see the LeBlanc support on the enemy team kills their ADC and then gets executed by the tower. This makes Rakan react by saying 15 in the chat, implying to surrender even though the game just started. And while this is happening in the chat, Faker gets ganked and dies. Then a couple minutes later, things aren't going well. The score is 4-13 and Faker is about to die for the 4th time in 10 minutes, and then questions why Rakan didn't help him. He seems to imply Rakan was near him, but we can't see that because his camera is covering the map. He then proceeds to report him in-game. But this Rakan player isn't just another solo queue player, but instead is a professional player in the LPL named Feather. Faker at this time does not know that, however. And then a few more minutes later, Faker is pushed into his tower, gets ganked, and Rakan is just casually walking by him, and then just sits in top lane. And then, as Rakan requested, at 15 minutes their team surrendered. By the end of the game, Rakan had done a total of 1,000 damage. Faker checks his profile after the game and says, "I hope he gets banned." And then he moves on to the next game. He's really just like us. But if you watched the previous video, this would seem unbelievable, but it happened again. Faker would queue up for a next game and he'd run into the same guy again, this time on the enemy team. And luckily, Faker won that game. But much like the previous story, Feather wouldn't get away with being a pro player and getting caught trolling in solo queue. Especially not on Faker's stream with thousands of people watching. So now came the consequences of his actions. Almost 10 days later, his team Thunder Talk came around and put out a statement regarding what their player did. They said they launched an investigation after learning of the situation, where they, quote, confirmed that this conduct constituted negative gameplay, which affected match fairness and other players' experience and violated the basic professional standards of a pro player and league regulations. This, along with other statements, followed by announcing that they have issued a fine and a deduction from this month's salary. It's not clear what either of those amounts could be, but similar to what we spoke about before, it's definitely thousands of dollars. Thousands of dollars all gone because he chose to troll in League. Oh, and Feather himself made a post to personally apologize as well. He said, "What happened in-game was the result of my own failure to keep the right attitude and mindset. It also had a bad impact on everyone and on the league/region. And I'm truly sorry. Wrong is wrong. Sorry for causing everyone trouble. It won't happen again." Though similar to what I said in the last video on this topic, these guys aren't sorry for trolling. They're sorry for getting caught, and if they hadn't been caught, they'd be running it down as we speak. But like we talked before, this isn't the only professional player to receive this level of punishment for trolling in solo queue. Though a comment that obviously popped up a lot in the previous video is that Riot only punished these guys because they trolled Faker. And that's not totally untrue. However, if anything, it's incredibly stupid for the trolling player to do this in Faker's game while Faker is streaming, because pro players get in trouble for being toxic or trolling in solo queue all the time, but they also get away with it all the time as well, because it's solo queue and who's keeping track of every single game. But if you're gonna behave like this in front of the game's golden boy, you're entirely asking for trouble. You almost deserve to get fined for being that level of stupid. But rewinding back a little bit, here's some more proof that Riot does step in and punish players for misbehaving in the game. In 2018, Riot actually checked the solo queue accounts of all the players and coaches right before the start of that year's Worlds tournament. They made an article titled "Competitive Ruling, Multiple Players." They said, 16 players and coaching staff from 8 teams across 5 regions were found to have exhibited various levels of negative behavior. Through routine behavior checks over the past week, we found multiple instances of professional players exhibiting negative behavior in solo queue during September. After reviewing the reports and chat logs, each of the following players was found to have exhibited abusive language towards teammates or opponents in solo queue games. Out of the 16 players, 12 of them received a formal warning, with the caveat being that if they produced this type of negative behavior again, they would receive an enhanced penalty. Among these 12 players were people such as Perks, Rookie, and Sven Skeren, who were relevant during this time. And the 4 players to get a bigger punishment included the coach of one of the Korean teams, who was fined $1,000 for having a high volume of reports, including, quote, pervasive negative chats. Then the rest were all relevant players. Diamond Prox from Gambit Esports was fined $1,000 for repeated toxic behavior. Invictus Gaming's The Shy was also fined $1,000 for intentionally feeding and using toxic language in solo queue. And then Uzi was fined $2,000 for griefing teammates, intentionally feeding, and account sharing while being toxic in chat. And by the way, Riot basically never did this ever again. If I had to guess, it's because they noticed that if they did enough research into these guys' personal accounts, they'll always find instances of all of them being toxic in some form or another. At the end of the day, we're talking about League of Legends. This game makes truly sane people turn into disgusting creatures. But it's just a game. The game ends, and I don't actually want you to get a life-altering disease. I just said it because you took my cannon minion. And Riot knows this, so if they punish every pro player for their behavior on their personal accounts, they'll end up finding and suspending every player in the tournament until no one's left, which is why, like I said earlier, someone like Feather and Ching Tian who would troll or display negative behavior on the livestream of the most famous player in the world is just asking for trouble. Because normally, Riot would probably ignore the Rakan walking around who's just waiting to surrender at 15. But if you do this to Faker, you're forcing Riot and the team's hand to speak up and say that's not acceptable. So in conclusion, if you're a professional player, you have to be careful of who your teammates are when you're trolling. Because this now brings us to a total of 2 professional players who have each lost a month of their salaries for trolling in Faker's games. And I will let you know when this eventually happens to yet another player. Thanks for watching, take care.